Hello, 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 hello. That's a lot of hellos, actually. That probably was overdoing it. Welcome back and Happy New Year. Hopefully you all had a very good one, or exciting one, or quiet one. You can pick your poison on that particular front. Jill and I are back now for Series 2 with Semrush, of course, around all things analytics once again, exploring even a little bit further than the last webinars, which, of course, are all available to watch on Semrush within the webinars page. This time we're talking about how Google Analytics can go slightly and unfortunately off-piste occasionally. We're going to be talking really, in this case, about how Google Analytics can turn into a little bit of what we would call a dumpster fire if you don't set it up properly. So we're talking about the human mistakes that make this particular tool, from a technological perspective, not work all that well. Jill, of course, is impassioned about mistakes in Google Analytics. I think she secretly loves people making mistakes. It gives her purpose in life. And indeed, really, of course, as you'll probably have seen on the webinar pages, we are talking about inaccuracies in data, data that lies to you, and of course, most importantly, data that ensures that you will make poor decisions by virtue of being incorrect. So we'll talk a bit about how, of course, accounts are structured, which is a little bit of a refresher of some of the elements of some of the earlier webinars in Series 1. We're talking a little bit about the settings that you actually need to think about, and in some ways, those that you don't really actually need to think about, as well as thinking about, well, actually, which toggles are on, which toggles are off, and the material impact of those toggles being on or off, as well as really thinking about, well, actually, how can we dive a little bit more or think a little bit more about event tracking? So really, we're thinking about micro conversions. We're thinking about, hey, did they play the video? Did they scroll down the page? And did they do anything actually that would have a material impact on the success of our brand, our product, and of course, our website at the same time? As well as talking a little bit closer to the end of the session around custom dimensions, around data import. Not a massive amount on that stuff, admittedly. And in the next, of course, episode, which is on February the 28th, which feels like it's miles away, but it will creep up on you, of course. We'll be talking about reports, given the knowledge that your data hopefully will be correct in your account at that particular stage. So massive hello to all of you. Jill, give us a hello. Normally you're kind of racing to talk.
Yeah, but that's because you told me to mute myself so I don't interrupt you like I've done in previous webinars, Aidan. I'm playing nicely. Hello, everybody.
Hello, Jill. Welcome back. Of course, it's our great pleasure to talk to you about some of the mistakes. Now, Jill, you've seen over the hundreds of audits that have kind of crossed our various different desks, mistakes ad infinitum on Google Analytics. I think we agreed that there was one account that we've seen that was nearly correct, but wasn't quite. As for the rest, not so much. Can you tell us a bit about that? Because that's a lot of inaccuracies potentially.
Yeah, so with Google Analytics, because it's a computer program and you don't know what you don't know, and you can't always assume that the people that created the account for you have done it correctly, or they understood your business well enough to track the things that matter. When we've done audits, when we've trained people in Google Analytics, the same mistakes happen, and that's the reason for this particular webinar, because we're focusing on, hey, if there's a problem or a data discrepancy, I've got like a go-to list of, I bet it's one of these things. So that's what we're going to focus on for this point. And as you mentioned, it's going to follow on to the webinars that we've done previously. So where we've explained certain concepts, I'm going to go over them again and then show you a live example in some cases to go, here's what it looked like when it was totally crap, and then what you need to do to fix it. So hopefully it will help people unpick any problems that they have had with their setup.
To kind of add to that in a kind of a curious way, and I know it sort of sounds a little bit like you and I have a conversation like we have every other day about how everyone's doing it wrong. Oh my God, it's a disaster. And in truth, that's not really the case. It can be a bit misleading for us to say that. It is not the case that you even necessarily need all the features and functions and elements of Google Analytics. What we're trying to kind of say here, and what we will explore over the next kind of 55 minutes, 56 minutes, is some of the common themes that do affect you. Now, Google Analytics, of course, is a computer program. It's a massive platform. There's lots of elements to consider, but not all of those are necessarily very, very important for you. So you shouldn't panic about it, I think, is the point. So whilst webinars around mistakes in your Google Analytics, you shouldn't panic about it because it's all addressable at this particular point. And at which point, of course, I'm going to ask lovely Jill to kick off her extremely interesting talk about some of those mistakes and indeed what you can do about them. Jill, quick, take it away.
Thank you very much. Okay, let's do the screen share. Fingers crossed this all works. All cooking? All cooking. Right, mistakes in your GA that can trash your data. This is a kind of character representation of what I've actually looked like when I've logged into the analytics reports and thought, oh my God, what is it that I'm actually looking at here? So to give you a bit of a flavor of what's coming up over the next hour, I am going to be recapping on how Google Analytics accounts are structured and the options that you have that can impact your data. I'm going to be focusing on good old filters, because filters, as I'm going to point out with a couple of different examples, have a really big impact on your data. So it's really important to get them all cooking correctly. We're going to revisit event tracking, at least of all because I like seeing a picture of Aidan Carroll's face on a bucket of chicken. And we're going to just gently touch on custom dimensions, more because I think it's a mistake to not be using them. And I'm going to give you all a couple of ideas on what you can actually do with your analytics, which is pretty cool if I do say so myself. Now, why should you care about your GA setup? So I'm going to tell you a bit of a story. Some of you may know this story already. The reason that we called our company the Colouring In Department is because people had used that as almost as a slur, as a mean thing to say to me when I was in the office. Oh, Jill, you're in the marketing department. You just play around with crayons all day. You just do stuff. And when the budget was getting cut or things were being moved, my department, my budget was the first one to go. And I'd have people say to me, well, we know marketing does stuff, but we don't always know what the impact is. And that's when Google Analytics can really help you, because you're reporting to people and you don't want them shouting at you saying, I gave you this money and what did I get from it? And you go, I don't know. You want to be able to turn around and give them a number and show them some data. Going back to my favorite quote from our data scientist, without data, you are just another person with an opinion. You want to make sure that you can validate what you're doing. On that thought, you also need to make sure that the data that you are providing is correct, because otherwise you will lose your credibility and people will shout at you and nobody wants that. So you want to make sure that the data you're presenting is clean. You want to be able to argue and explain how Google Analytics, or any analytics platform for that matter, works, and then use that to save the day, to make people fall in love with marketing again. So crap in, crap out. One of the things with any program, including Google Analytics, is that it's as good as the settings that you have. So if you have a bad configuration, if you haven't turned a certain toggle on, then the data that's inside those reports, those reporting views that you're using to give information to your boss, your board, your client, whatever, if it's crap, then it's crap. You've got to make sure that the data that you're presenting is actually valid data. So you've got to have a look at your admin setting. You've got to make sure that your house is actually tidy, just as hopefully you'd never invite people round for a cup of tea and a hobnob biscuit without cleaning up your living room. You want to make sure that your analytics setup is equally tidy as well. So you don't want to be like this lovely purple-haired lady going, oh no, everything's fine, it's tidy. I'm just going to throw stuff in the back of the cupboard and hope for things to be okay. You need to make sure that everything is nice and clean and tidy. So this messy door, this crap that can be in the back of your admin settings, I'm talking about this, the account setting. So you arrive here by looking at the little left-hand cog, which will show your analytics account setup. Now, depending on your level of access, if you have read only, so it's like being a baby in a playpen, they don't let you have a look at all the toys that you've got, this will be just a clear whitewash. You won't be able to see any information. If you have higher admin access, then you will be able to see how your account properties and views have been set up. So one of the mistakes that we're going to talk about, the first one of the bunch, is actually getting your house in order to make sure that you have the right account properties and views. So we did this in the first webinar in series 1, where we talked about analytics being a little bit like a house. You have your account level, and I want you to think of this as the roof of your website, your little house that you have, and you'll get given a UA number, so hypothetically UA 1234. You then have a property, and I want you to think of these properties as a floor, an actual living floor that your visitors are going to come in and sit down on your sofa and do stuff like buy stuff from you, send a lead form, whatever. And you've got different reporting windows, which are your view settings. And then to make those windows work, you use filters, which is like adding drapes and blinds. So if you have a basic website, so you've got like our website, thecoloringindepartment.com. If you just have a single website, you have essentially a bungalow, or I think you call them a ranch if you're in America. So you'd have a roof setting, UA 12345. You have a property, so it will be UA 12345-1. And you should have 4 windows, 4 reporting views. Google recommends that you have a raw window. So if I have a look through this window, I see absolutely everything. You have a test view. This is where you play around and check if something's going to work or not. You check a filter, you check a goal, you check your settings and make sure that you don't flatline your data. And then when you're happy with it, you then create a reporting view, which is the one that you go in and use to validate your decisions and your strategies and what you're doing and whatnot. So for most businesses, this is essentially what you're looking at. Now, anything that we do to our settings, if I start messing around with my roof, if I whack a massive hole in it, it's going to impact the floors beneath it. If I do something to a window by adding a filter, it only changes the data to that particular window. If I clean window on the left, the window on the right doesn't magically get cleaned as well. So you've got to make sure you go into all of your settings and audit them, and not assume that if you do something at one end of the house that something's going to magically happen at the other. Now, if you have a multiple brand scenario, so you have different websites that sit independently from each other. So you have a website, maybe you have a separate business, maybe you have an app, but they all sit separate to each other. You've essentially got a flat or a multi-story building. They all sit under the same roof. So the company name, I'm going to make up company named JillLikesGin.com, and I've got several floors for different things that I'm selling, because I've decided I don't want to do gin anymore. I want to sell vodka, or I want to sell ice cream or whatever. But if they sit separately to each other, they're separate floors with their own little reporting views. And I can see what is going on for those particular properties. Now, the mistake that I see more commonly these days is something where you have multiple domains for a website, but they've been built as if they were a flat. So I see this a lot in e-commerce sites at the moment. I think because of the ease that you can have bolt-on tools to have a shop or to have an account, the domains will change. So you might have website.com, where you're sending all of your beautiful visitors to go and have a look at your products and services. They decide they want to buy it, so they click on a button and they go to shop.website.com. The website still looks the same, the design still looks the same, but the URL has changed. And then when I've decided I'm going to buy from the shop and I'm going to create an account, another domain pops up called account.coloringin, or whatever it is that you've got. Now, the mistake that can really ruin your data is if you set up a multi multi-domain website where the ecosystem is actually within the same business and you've set them up as separate floors, you are unable then to track the customer journey, because when I log into my analytics, like a floor, an actual physical floor, I'm on floor 4 of our building and Aidan's on floor 7. I can't see what's going on the floors above me. I can only see what's going on this particular floor that I'm on at the moment. So if you have a goal for somebody creating an account or somebody buying something, if I'm in the reporting view for coloringindepartment.com, but the goal happened on a different floor and you haven't tied that all together with something called cross-domain tracking, then you are not able to build your goals. You're not able to see the journey. You can't see what marketing brought people in to that particular sale. So everybody's having a bit of a hard time. So the first thing that you need to think about when it comes to your analytics setup, and again, we've got loads of resources on this on our Coloring Insight, and you can go back to the first webinar with Semrush on your account setup. Double check that your roof and your floor and your windows are correct, and double check that if you do have an ecosystem where you've got several domains but they all really need to be packed into one, have you done cross-domain tracking so that you're essentially treating all of these different domains as one, so that you can actually then report on your conversion rates and your user behaviors and what's going on and things like that. The next mistake that we see a lot, which seems really obvious, but they're interestingly absent in so many audits that I've done, is not having any goals on any of your reporting views, or sometimes when I've done an audit where there's several windows, there's goals on one and not on the other. And I've had so many people come back to me going, oh, I thought if I created it in this view, they would be created magically in the other. And I'm like, no, it's a computer program. You're going to have to go in and build that goal another time, or if you've got 17 views, then you build that goal 17 times. Now, sometimes the response I've had from students and people that we've trained, oh, well, I'm not an e-commerce site, Jill, so I can't do it. And that's just not true at all. For any business, you want to be tracking a significant profitable customer interaction. Now that can be, I signed up to your newsletter, I scrolled down to the bottom of the page, I submitted a contact form, I bought the damn product, whatever it is that you're doing, you have 20 goals available to you per reporting view. 20. And what we normally see are either 1 or 2 big goals. So these are your macro goals. So think of these as, if these don't happen, then I'm out of a business. And then your micro goals are the smaller, meaningful interactions as people edge ever so closely to doing what you want them to do. So what you want to get to is a 20 goal view. So this is one for a company that we did some work for, and it's a non-profit, it's an education company. You can't actually buy anything on the website, yet they were using all 20 goals possible. They were getting it for people that downloaded a PDF, people that clicked on an email, info at website address that pops up on the website. They were tracking people that were clicking on telephone numbers, the first stage of an application, the final stage of an application. And by doing this, we were able to go through the analytics report and understand how far people were getting to in terms of the conversion rate. So from the top of the funnel, what's the conversion rate? And then at the bottom of the funnel, what do we get there? And it was a good way for us to see where you had a hole in your leaky bucket. So for this particular company, people getting to the downloading the content had a phenomenal conversion rate. It was something like 9%. For people doing the very last step, the one goal that the business really wanted them to do, it was something like 0.4%. So we're like, okay, now we know where to focus our attention. There was a gap between the stage of somebody being pretty warm and quite close to converting to actually getting over the hurdle. And that's where we used our resources to try and fix that hole and do some usability testing, doing some A/B testing, conversion rate optimization to make things a little bit better. It's also very useful when you are looking at it from a marketing channel point of view. in Google Analytics, and we talk about this in our Tracking Like a Champ webinar, you have the acquisition report in Google Analytics where 100% of the credit goes to the last non-direct channel. And if you just have one goal, so hey, they bought the product, they downloaded the pack, then you've got the danger of undervaluing certain channels and also understanding the role of that particular channel. So imagine having 20 goals and being able to understand the role of a particular marketing channel. So you might see that Facebook is really good at getting people to watch a video, but they're not going to convert. Like that was the early awareness stage of the journey. But email was really good at getting them to start a free trial. And then people seem to convert on brand AdWords, and we got them over the fence and it worked. And by doing this, you're able to give the managed expectations of your marketing channels and how they're actually performing and the role that they have. Not every single channel and every single campaign is going to be the person that scores the goal, but they have a role. And if you have 20 goals, your micro and your macro conversions, it gets a lot easier to actually present that information to people. Now on to one of my favorite topics, filters. When we are talking about our reporting views, as I mentioned, we have our little windows where I can look in and see what all of my lovely users are doing, and if they're engaging with my content, if they are buying stuff. But filters have probably been one of the main culprits of the data just being god awful, because they are quite powerful. And if you haven't done it in a test view and you haven't checked out that they were working, it is very, very easy to flatline your data. So I'm going to give you some examples of where this has happened. So this is an example of a reporting view that was created. We had our test view, our raw view, and our master reporting view. And then we also had a view for particular countries, so we could isolate certain markets. Now, this view was meant to only show people from the United States of America. Now, when I went into the reporting view and I went into audience, I think we can all see quite quickly here, because of the gorgeous heat map, it's not just showing people from the United States of America, it's showing me people from different parts of the country. So this company was saying, right, we had 52,000 users in America this month. And that's wrong, because actually only 48% of this data was from America. The rest came from different countries. And when they said to me, Jill, we have a problem with our data, there's a data discrepancy, we don't understand what's gone wrong, I was like, let's have a look at those filters, let's see what's happened. And essentially they had the right idea but the wrong filter. So they had a website where there were certain domains. So they had website.com /FR for all the French content, or / this is where I'm going to forget where they are, .co.uk for the United Kingdom, etc., etc. Now, if they did this in the test view, they would have gone, hang on a second there, Bob, you can see that the traffic is clearly not just showing from a particular country. Let's go back and see what we've done and make some changes. And they didn't do that. They didn't do any of the test views, which would have fixed this particular obvious problem. So if you have a website where you have different particular domains that people can click on, as you can see from this example here, if I was in France, I could still look at the United States version. If I was in South America, I could still see the French version. So what we needed to look at here was actually a filter that was based on the location. So instead of a predefined filter that said only show traffic that went on this particular URL, you have to put in the country. And another tip here, you have to write the country exactly as it shows in the Google admin settings. So if they put in France with a capital F, then you have to put the filter pattern that exactly matches what is in the Google Analytics settings, because this is a computer program. There is no empathy here. They won't look at this and go, oh, you put USA there. Did you mean United States? No, it's going to just flatline your data and say, computer says no. So you've got to have a look at your filters and double check that it's giving you the information that you want. So that was a nice easy one to get us started. The next set of filter mistakes will show you how you can have real errors in your revenue or your page views, or just general, the data's not making any sense and you're kind of feel like you're about to pull out that Jenga and everything's going to come crashing down on you and you're going to lose the game. So the first mistake that I see with filters is to not exclude your staging environments. So this happens quite a lot, actually, when I think of all the audits that I've done. There was one audit I did for a global company last year where they had 20 different staging domains, and they didn't put a filter to say exclude staging.website.com, dev.website.com. And when we went into the behavior reports, into all content, and I added a little filter to say show me anything that included the word staging or dev, you can start to see, and we've blurred it out for client confidentiality here, that there were page views and visits coming from the staging environments where they were testing things, where they were rolling things out, but they weren't real users. And you've got to remember, when it comes to conversion rates, that Google is calculating those conversion rates based on your sessions. So if some of the sessions are your dev team or your agencies working on stuff, you're diluting your conversion rate. You might be getting kicked for a conversion rate that looks really bad. And in truth, it's actually not bad. It's just you've got staging environments. And this is where sometimes those revenue discrepancies can come in. I had a client where they said, okay, so Salesforce is showing X amount of revenue and Google Analytics is showing a totally different number. And we don't know why that has happened. And we drilled it down that on one particular day in the staging.website.com, there was about £40,000 of fake sales, because it was dev just testing that the features worked and people could actually buy. But because they didn't create a filter to exclude those particular domains, and you can still check it, you can still, for the reverse, have a view that says only include traffic from staging.website.com, so you can see what's going on that staging. That's fine, but you do not want to include this in your reports, because it's just going to give you those data discrepancies. So if you have got any staging environments, you want to go into your view settings for each view that you want to do this in, and do it in your test view first, check that it works, and you want to go in and say, hey Google, please exclude the data from dev.whatever the website name is, or staging.website name. Do it in your test view, check that it works, and then roll it over into the reporting views, and then the data is going to be a little bit cleaner and life will be a little bit better as a result. Another problem that I've seen goes back to the cross-domain account structure that we talked about at the beginning of this webinar. Sometimes I've worked with companies where they have a few different subdomains that are all part of the same ecosystem, but they weren't included for some reason in the cross-domain tracking. And sometimes this can literally be down to a bad brief and just assuming that somebody understood what you were saying. For this particular client, they turned around to their dev team and said, please can you do cross-domain tracking on shop.website, blog.website, etc., etc. Assuming that the dev team knew what all the other subdomains were. They didn't, so they just created the cross-domain tracking on blog.website and shop.website, and they ignored the rest. So you can see what's going to happen here when you go into your acquisition reports. How did people get to you? When they went into the channels and the source, where does it live? They had a lot of users that were their users from their own ecosystem. So they shouldn't have been coming in as traffic at all, because it was part of the same website structure. So that was just another issue that kind of creeps up on people. Another problem with filters can be down to your content report. So when we are going into our behavior reports and we want to understand what people are doing, we can go into our all pages report. And this was from a client that we did some work for, and they said, our content is amazing. We have 11,416 page views. Go team! And we went, that's fabulous. That's wonderful. However, they hadn't set up in their admin settings, and we talk about this in the first webinar that we did for Semrush, so you can go away and find out how to do this. They didn't set up their site search correctly in terms of adding a filter to exclude the query path. So this is what it looks like. Now, you may or may not know this, but Google will record the URL at the time of a user's session. And for this particular website, they had a lot of people using their site search, and I mean a lot. So every time somebody went onto the little search bar and said, I am looking for insert keyword, like I'm looking for something on change management, I'm looking for something for frameworks, or whatever the keyword is for the content that they were looking, that URL where it pulls in the query parameters that's included in that particular search string gets recorded as a page in your analytics. And when we added a filter to exclude query parameters, those 11,000 and odd pages actually got stripped down to about 3,000 pages. So that was an uncomfortable conversation to have with them, to say, actually, people aren't reading your content. They're not looking at your pages. You have a usability problem. People can't find the information, and they are resulting in your search features to try and help them find that information. Now, this was a website that had a lot of content, so they were a little bit upset, but the good news is we were able to build a filter that looks like this. Don't be scared by the regular expression. That's just basically like computer talk, to strip out the query parameters. Now, you still get that data in your reports. If you go to your behaviors and go to site search, it will give you a list of all the keywords that people type in. So you get an idea of the terms that people are entering into your site search facility. But it does mean that when you go to your all pages report, that they are the individual pages that people are looking at, and not maybe the same page. But if 100 people used a search bar, it looks like you've got 100 different page views, when actually it's just one particular page. So that's definitely been a bit of a gotcha for quite a few people. So do add that. Do it in your test view first, roll it over, life's good again. One of the other mistakes that we've seen in accounts is not using event tracking. Now, event tracking for me, once you've got your house set up and you're tracking things correctly in your acquisition reports, is to actually understand what people are doing on your website, because you are not a mind reader. You don't know when you look at those all pages report, and let's assume now that you've got your little filter on to take out query parameters and your staging sites and your dev sites, and everything's working hunky-dory for you. Do you know what people are actually doing on your website? Who's scrolling down the page? Who's clicking on images? Who's printing a page or downloading a PDF or playing a video or clicking on an email address? This does not come pre-baked in to Google Analytics. And the reason why it doesn't come pre-baked in is because you've got like a million websites using analytics. Google doesn't know what you want to track. They don't know what you want to call it. So you have to do this. You have to set up events. Now, the mistake that I'm going to focus on here is just getting the brief wrong from the offset. So you need to think about the things that you want to track, and you have to talk to the computer program the way that it wants to be talked to. So they want to have category, actions, and labels. So think of your categories as big, broad buckets for you to organize the things that people could be doing on your website. The action describes the doing. What is it that they actually did? And the label is going to further describe that action. So in our lovely example of using a fast food restaurant, you have a big, broad bucket. Here's a bucket of chicken. The doing is the action. I'm eating some fried chicken. And the label, what is it I'm actually eating? Oh, I'm eating a chicken thigh with hot sauce. So you've got to go into your event tracking, which will be found in your behavior reports. And I want you to audit what you currently have. This is how not to do it. I did an audit for an e-commerce company, and they said, we've got event tracking, Jill. I was like, fabulous. Let's have a look at what you've got. And we had one bucket for e-commerce. I'm like, all right, let's have a look what's in here. 2 actions associated with a category, non-interaction and interaction. So I was like, okay, I'm going to open door number 2 to see what the interactions were labeled. And they were all labeled to not set. So that doesn't help anybody. You basically just wasted a load of opportunity here. And as you can see for this particular example, there were 82,000 events fired in a month period. And when you go in and audit your analytics, which is the fix, you have to go through your pages, your home page, your money pages being the pages that you want people to actually do something, fill out a form, buy the shoes, buy the bottle of gin, book the holiday, whatever. But you want to go through it and make sure that you have independent categories and that the actions associated with those categories don't overlap. And this is one of the issues that I've seen with event tracking. I might have somebody have an action, so this is the doing, and they've called it click. But that's associated with one or more categories. When you look into the report, you've overinflated a potential action because you've named 3 different things the same thing, if that makes sense. And it's just really heartbreaking when that happens. So you want to make sure that you've gone through and you've created your categories, actions, and labels, and you've labeled them correctly. And you want to make sure you filled in any gaps of anything that is missing. And you want to make sure that you don't duplicate any of the naming conventions for your categories, actions, and labels. Because when it comes to building segments or it comes to digging into this data, if I've got 3 different separate categories, let's say it was playing a video or downloading a PDF or clicking on an email address, and all the actions for those categories were labeled as click, when I go into my analytics and say, hey, show me all the people that watch the video, it's going to count all the other things as well. And that's going to give you a false number, which you don't want to have. Now, a tip here, because I'm aware that we're speaking to people that are going to be using a tool like Semrush for their SEO and their PPC. If you have event tracking on your Google Analytics account, which I strongly suggest you do, because you're going to need them to build goals, you need them to build segments. But if you can build a segment, then you can build an audience, a remarketing list in Google Analytics. So for this, I want you to think of building segments based on what people are doing, linking back to those 20 goals that you've hopefully created on your account. And I want you to start building remarketing lists based off of what people nearly did. So imagine having events firing correctly where somebody goes on a web page, scrolls down the page, downloads a PDF, plays a video, half filled out the form and added to basket but didn't buy. Build a segment, and if you've linked up your AdWords to your Google Analytics, and again, we go through this in the first webinar that we did in the series, then you can click on that little button called Actions and build an audience. That's going to build a remarketing list that will sit in your AdWords, which means you can remarket to the people that nearly bought. They would be my first go-to people that I would do any remarketing on, and then you can drill down further as you so wish. So there's a nice little bonus point for you there. So as you can see with a lot of these mistakes in analytics, it's just down to not fully understanding the implications of the features that you have, namely a bad account setup in the first instance. You don't have the right reporting views. You have a flaw or several flaws for different subdomains when you should have done the cross-domain tracking. You don't test anything, so you don't see any filters that are making mistakes. And if you are doing filters, you want to make sure that you're at the very least removing your staff. You want to remove any staging environments. If you're going to be looking at particular markets, then you want to make sure that you have the correct filter to isolate and only see those particular users. I've got a friend who I won't name because it would be mean, who contacted me this week and said, Jill, my traffic's just a 0, flatline 0. Nothing is coming in my Google Analytics reports. What do you think's happened? I'm in Google Tag Manager and everything's firing. And I was like, have you checked your filters? And he went, oh, crap. Yeah, I added a filter and the filter just deleted everything. The computer just went, nope, this doesn't make any sense. And that means he's lost about 6 weeks worth of data. And because you can't go back and reprocess data that's been processed, that data's lost. You can't get that information again, which is not ideal, ladies and gentlemen, at all. So hopefully they've been some useful use cases. I now want to touch on a mistake, which is just a mistake by not using them. Custom dimensions and metrics and data import. I love talking about this particular topic because analytics can be really, really bloody good if you've got it right. But let's face it, they are default settings, default channel grouping, default whatever. So if you think about your analytics setup as if it was a standard room, we all get the same furniture. It's basically like an IKEA shop. We all have the same sofa. We all have the same furniture. But let's say you wanted to bring in a life-size cutout of Tom Hardy in your living room to make things look pretty. And for some of you that know me, I actually got sent a life-size cutout of Tom Hardy. So because that worked, I like small batch gin. If anybody would like to send any to our office, I won't say no to that. But my main point here is that your business is very unique. The insights that you want are also very unique. So if you have got a clean reporting interface, but you want to add more information. So as the word suggests, you want to customize it, bring in your own dimensions and metrics. You can do this with something called custom dimensions and metrics. I only do this with clients when your house is clean. There's no point in stuffing more information in if the information is crap to begin with. So to help you understand this concept, because I think it's pretty cool, you need something called a key. So this is a terminology that's used from Google. So if you imagine you've got your data that sits in an Excel document, a CRM system, whatever, and then you've got your Google Analytics data. You can't just throw something into analytics and hope it sticks. It's like having a block of wax and pouring a load of oil over it. It's just not going to stick. You need a key. You need something that's going to lock that data together. And this is where one of the harder parts of using custom dimensions and metrics will be for you. It's just the thinking part, the actual planning part. Now, creating a custom dimension in your property settings will take you minutes. It will take Dev a lot longer to actually get this working for you. But the thought process of thinking about what else can help my data analysis, and we'll go through this in our next webinar in February where we'll talk about creating dashboards that people are going to love. I'm going to walk you through some examples of where adding extra data into your analytics can really, really help you. So let's go through these one by one. In Google Analytics, there is no dimension for refund. So if you are selling stuff, you can go, right, this month I sold 20 pairs of shoes and I made £1,000. If somebody then decides that they don't want to keep the shoes anymore and they send them back to your company, Google Analytics doesn't know that that happened. Now, for me, I want to understand how much did I sell and then what got refunded, and then hopefully tie this together so I can understand the marketing channels. Like if I find a little cohort of people from a campaign that had a really high chance of refunding stuff, I don't want to spend money on those campaigns anymore. I want customers that are going to come to the website and they are going to stay. They are going to keep the damn product. So the way that we're going to stitch this together is with your e-commerce data and your product data. So provided you've set that up correctly, you can stitch that together by creating a custom dimension and a metric where you can punch in that refund data. You can either load this up manually through your property settings, or you can just pump it in through your API. But when you've got this, it's so, so cool. I've also used it for things like availability of a product, because sometimes, and I know we've all been there, especially at the moment with all the sales, the endless sales that we've got, I will find a particular product and I'll go, oh, that's nice, I'm going to go buy it. And then I click on the page and then it goes, oh, we're out of stock at the moment. I'm like, oh, that's not helpful. So I find it quite useful to have in extra information for products availability, so I can see if there was a badly performing page. Maybe it's because that particular product just sold out super quick. So my marketing campaigns were wonderful. However, it didn't quite sell because we'd sold everything. Now thinking about software as a service. So I've used this for clients where they have a monthly subscription. So if you think of things like Semrush, like Dropbox, like MailChimp, that kind of thing, something where you are paying a set fee each month. Again, in my analytics, I can say to my boss, hey, look, I sold this many packages this particular month. Aren't I fabulous? But what would be really interesting is to understand, by tying in the user ID or the client ID for that particular sale, what that monthly recurring revenue is. And if anybody's churned, if anybody's decided to cancel that particular subscription. And what this is going to do with my analysis is really help me understand the users that brought me customers that spend a lot of money with me. I want to then go in and build segments in my audience acquisition, behavior, and conversion reports. Who are your best users? How old are they? Where do they live? What's the device? What pages do they look at? And I'm going to replicate that across my strategies. When we are looking at things like content, so if you are writing a lot of content, then it would be useful to know, if I've got a lot of people on staff writing, who gets the sale. So looking at things like the author, because that doesn't exist as a dimension in analytics, I can tie that to the page URL. So say, hey, Google, this is the URL, and this is the person that wrote it, and this is the category. Now, when you think about having websites where you've got thousands and thousands of pages, and you'll go, well, these are all the blogs. Okay, well, who wrote the blogs and what was the category? This is going to help you really amp up your content strategy. I know one of the conferences that we talked at in America last year, we used the example kindly provided by Jono from Yoast. And there is a plugin with the Yoast plugin where you can actually stitch in your Yoast readability score. And then if you tie this in with your authors and categories, it means you can understand who's doing really well in terms of moving the needle. But if you've got those 20 goals that we talked about, those micro and macro goals, maybe you've got some content writers that are really good at getting people on a free trial. And maybe you've got somebody that writes more product guides, for example, where they really sell, but that's because they always write about product and not about the top of the funnel stuff. So that can be really interesting information. Then let's imagine that you've got a support site, user-generated content. Charities will fit into this. If your business model is to build a community and you want people to engage and share content and comment on content, then I want to know which pages are doing that for me. So I can build different dimensions and metrics to do that as well. One of my favorites of late has been for the two-sided marketplace. So think of the eBay example. You've got a number of users that are going to be the buyers, the people that actually buy stuff, you and me going on and wanting to buy presents for people. And then you've got sellers. You've got actual businesses that are actually creating profiles, or just people that are flogging off their Christmas presents that they don't want. I don't want to look at all of my analytics data and go, here's 1,000 users. It would be useful for me to split that traffic and say, well, these are the buyers and these are the sellers. Because big surprise here, they have different user journeys, they have different characteristics and different traits. And because of that business model, you are on a constant balancing act to make sure you have enough buyers and enough sellers to make that business model work. So by using custom dimensions, you can really understand how this can work for you, how you can adapt your strategies. And then the final example is the lead gen example. Now this was, as well as the refund e-commerce example, the lead gen example was one of my first learnings of using custom dimensions about 6 or 7 years ago. I was in a constant battle with the sales department where I'm going, well, you know, sales, I'm giving you loads of leads. My website is giving me a conversion rate of say 2% of people that are filling out our application forms or our content forms or our lead gen forms, and they go into your little system, and if they don't convert, well, then you're obviously not doing a very good job. My leads are wonderful. But the truth is, I had no idea. If somebody filled out a contact form and it went off into the magical landscape of sales and their CRM systems and whatever it is, I had no idea if anybody actually converted. I had no idea if it did anything. So by using the user ID and the client ID, we pushed into a form that data, and we looped it into our CRM system and then fed it back into Google Analytics. Now, what this meant, and unfortunately for me, dear viewers, I was actually a bit crap at my job, because it turns out that out of all the leads that I sent, yeah, not many converted. I was pretty bad. So I was able to go back to the drawing board and go, right, which of these leads did convert? And then build segments based off of job titles and lead values, because we had a drop down where people could self-select what their job role was. And we could go in and go, right, which acquisition campaigns actually brought in the clients, and let's start doing replica strategies and lookalike audiences. And for the people that didn't convert, let's do less of that. Like, let's understand what's happening in terms of our marketing strategy. So as you can imagine, there is, oh my God, there's so much you can do with custom dimensions and metrics. We've got explainers and a planning document on the colouring in department if you wish to go and have a look at that. But one of the mistakes that I definitely think are just purely not using them, because, you know, they're pretty sweet. Because once you have that data inside of your account, you can add secondary dimensions. So this is when you add another tab of data to your report. So imagine being in your behavior reports, looking at your pages. You can add that secondary dimension to say, show me the author of those pages, and then drill down to see what's happening. For anything, if you can build segments, you want to build a segment. So you might say, show me everybody where the monthly recurring revenue is like £200 if your average order value is like 50. Like, who are your best users? Show me all of my users that are the B2B or the B2C if you're a two-sided marketplace. So you're able to split out that data. You're able to split out those different users. And again, as I mentioned, if you can build a segment, you can build a remarketing list. So you can say, hey, show me all the users that are the buyers, but they haven't bought anything for a while. So let's send them a message around the web and follow them and give them a little message to say, hey, remember us, come back. You can build custom dashboards. You can build data studio reports. You can query the API. It gets really, really cool and really nice and lovely. But if your data's trashed, then don't do this. Like, go back to the drawing board, make sure your house is set up correctly, make sure your filters are in the right order, and that you are excluding or including data. And guys, if you're doing this in a test view, it does become a lot easier to spot these particular mistakes. You should all be using goals. And if you're struggling with the idea of goals for those different 6 business models that I mentioned, we've got ungated content on the colouring in department resources where I've done 20 goals to 6 different business models. You can just go and download them and just knock yourself out. And, you know, there's no excuse really. You can all have those particular goals. So if you would like to get the slides, if you want to go and have a look at the resources, then pop yourself over to Colouring In. We'd love to have you visit our lovely house and see what's happening. I'm going to shut up talking now because my throat's a little bit sore. I've had a cold for ages, and I'm going to listen to Aidan and hear of any questions that we may have. Have we got any questions, Aidan?
Jill, never a day goes by when there aren't any questions, which is good, and of course testament to your wonderful talk, even though that you have a cold and have had a cold for 3 months.
3 months!
I know, right?
Oh, no.
A couple of interesting ones, at least recurring ones, which can be kind of, I think, beguilingly simple. So one of the most kind of common threads that I think came up, and forgive me, YouTube audience, if I've misinterpreted you on this particular account. Jill, there seems to be a lot of chat around, well, actually, how do we exclude bots? Is this an issue? What about spam? What if we're getting traffic from sources that perhaps are undesirable? Things that we might have disallowed, say, for instance, in Search Console, are still coming into our Google Analytics reports. How might we address these two relatively synergistic issues, in your opinion? So
what, and that's a very good question. Spam, we'll tackle that one first. So fake websites sending you traffic, but they're not actually real visitors. And those visitors are showing up as sessions, and with them showing up as sessions, they're screwing with your data. If you go into your acquisition reports and you drill into the referral, so websites sending you traffic, and then I add a secondary dimension to say source, so where does the link live, you can start to find particular users and visitors where the bounce rate is 100% and time on site is set to 0. And you'll see things like I love Italy, freesocialsharebuttons.com. So you start to pick out common culprits that are basically spamming your site. If I find a couple of different domains that are rubbish, I will go through the process again where we'll go, right, let's have a look at all of these different links, and I add a secondary dimension to show the host name. So it's a bit like, do you remember, I've used this example before, the Will Smith program, 4th of July, like where they're like trying to shoot all the aliens and like they go, do you know what, we just need to take out the mothership. That's essentially what you're doing. If you find that you've got several domains that are all spam, but there's a mothership where the host is faketraffic.abc.com, I will build a filter to say exclude all traffic from the host name, the mothership, so that I'm not constantly trying to scoop up their annoying children, so to speak. So yeah, you've got to kind of go, if you've got an idea of what you think it is, then you go through and work out how you're going to identify it. So what's the source name? And then you go into your test view and you build that filter to see if it's working. Also in your view settings, there is a little tick box that doesn't get ticked by default, which is exclude all known bots and spiders. So you want to make sure in your view settings that you tick that little bad boy to make sure that it excludes Google's kind of nice list. Like, you know, they've got these are naughty and these are nice. So you want to make sure you exclude that. Does that answer the question?
I mean, yes, I suppose is the answer. Was asked a little bit earlier, and I kind of affirmed more or less the same thing. But for the benefit of all, I thought it would be interesting if you explained it in your own very eloquent words, as usual, Bill. A couple of other things came up. Cross-domain tracking is a bit of a repetitive one. That one came in on Twitter, actually. Hello, phone. The movie you were referring to, I think, was Independence Day.
Yeah.
Independence Day notwithstanding, cross-domain tracking, thinking about connecting up our various different motherships, so to speak. How does that work? What are there issues with that we need to be aware of? Is the UA code involved in some way? What would you say in a nutshell on making sure cross-domain tracking is set up properly?
So there are a couple of steps with cross-domain tracking. You need to understand which domains do you want to track as a whole ecosystem. So we'll take our example. We've got colouring in department. And then when you do our online courses, it'll be like teach.colouringin. We want to stitch those two websites together, essentially, those two different domains. I want to see the full ecosystem. So instead of having several floors where I've got different properties with different property numbers, I'm going to say, hey, Google, we're going to treat each of these different floors as if it's one really big floor. So I'm going to use the UA 1234-1 on colouring in department and teach.colouring in department. And then there's a couple of different, if you just Google how to do cross-domain tracking, there's a couple of steps to get this actioned. It's just knowing that that's an option, because I think the mistakes that I've seen and the example that I've used before, because it's such a bad example, there was a company that had several different subdomains and domains, and because they're all on different floors and I can't see what you're doing and I can't see the people below me, they couldn't build goals, they couldn't give a conversion rate. And when they went to investors and said, hey, here's our product, we don't know what our conversion rate is or what people are doing, because when they convert, 100% of the traffic came from website.com. Now, they just read off of the internet, oh, if you have several domains, they should be independently collected. So the developers went, great, here's property 1, property 2, property 3, property 4. They didn't know that there was something called cross-domain tracking, so they never Googled it. They never got it set up. When we did get it set up, though, and you could see across the whole journey of how people were flowing through those different domains, because it was all one company, one website, one ecosystem, they could then give the actual conversion rate. And the difference it made for them, they got about 5 million in their VC funding. When we went with the actual numbers, the guys went, oh, we would have probably given you 15 million if you'd have given us that information. It's like Dragon's Den or Shark Tank. You know, if you don't have the numbers, it's that picture we had before, people shouting at you, you know, you're just going to disintegrate. So if you know that you've got an ecosystem that needs to be tracked, then cross-domain tracking is what you need to have set up.
Thanks, JQ. Last one, and we have time for one more. Now, we talked about it a little bit in a previous episode. I believe it might have been episode 2. of the Semrush webinar series 1 at the end of 2018, which of course the link to which is available within YouTube, of course, in the chat box. Those of you who are watching on YouTube. The question really, and you probably know what I'm going to say, is around this idea of UTM codes. Now, there's a lot of people in this particular room who are what we would describe as search professionals. I think that's fair to say. Forgive me if that is incorrect, YouTube audience. So thinking about actually how we might use UTM codes effectively, what are some of the common errors with UTM codes? Just a short one really, Jill, and how might they obviously fundamentally impact our acquisition reports in Google Analytics?
Okay, so I've probably got about, what, 2 minutes to do this right? Okay. Challenge accepted. Okay, so within the acquisition reports, you have mediums, which are big, broad buckets to put your channels in, and then you've got source, where does the link live? So for things like organic, that's fine. Google will know, hey, this came from Google. So the medium is organic because that's the channel. And where does the link live? Oh, it came from Google, or it came from Bing. One mistake that you can fix with a filter is DuckDuckGo, for example. We know that's a search engine. Google has classed that when it comes into your reports as referral. So I think that's Google's dev team going, we don't think you're a search engine, because they've dumped it as a website giving you a link and the source is DuckDuckGo. So what you can do is create a filter to say, when it comes in as DuckDuckGo, don't put it in the referral bucket, rename it and put it in the organic bucket. Another mistake that I see is people getting the sources and mediums mixed up. So if you tag email as the source is email and the medium something else, it's just going to go into the other bucket. If you tag something that isn't correct, so let's say you tag your Twitter content as organic, or like Twitter or something like that, and you put the medium, the big broad bucket, as organic, then that means your social media traffic is going to go into your organic reports, which is where all your SEO lives. So it's just about working through all of the different marketing channels that you have and making sure that you are correctly labeling them. And because it's a computer program, if you type your email as an example as capital E in the email, it doesn't recognize it. It'll get thrown into the other bucket. And we've had this, haven't we, Aidan? We've had a client that went, we're going to sack our email team because we have no data, because it just never came in. So mistagging, spelling mistakes, getting your sources and mediums in a twist will screw up that report quite quickly if you're not careful. So you've got to, just watch the webinar on tracking like a champ and you'll be a lot better.
Fabulous. Thank you, Jill. Thank you, everybody, for watching this wonderful webinar on all things GA and mistakes there. And hopefully you are less terrified, or you feel a little bit more able to troubleshoot maybe some of your own account issues or challenges that you might have, remembering that it is a computer program and it is forever evolving, and there are things that will crop up because that's how life works one way or another. Thank you equally for all of the questions. We are 100% out of time now. However, we will be back on February the 28th, as I'm sure many of you are already aware, at 5 p.m. GMT, so that's London time. We'll be talking about creating reports that keep the budget flowing, in the notion that we actually have our account set up properly and our data is not on fire, which of course is why this particular webinar, GA 2.1, came before GA 2.2 around reporting on that particular data. But for now, we bid you a fond farewell. Hopefully the remainder of your January, which is a super depressing month actually, goes extremely well. So a big thank you of course, from myself and from Jill for being such good sports and listening, mostly to Jill drop some knowledge bombs. We'll see you next time on the 28th of February. Now, there are always webinars available on Semrush. Of course, there is a content one coming up very soon indeed. It is worthwhile checking out the webinars page to see if there's anything else that tickles your proverbial fancy. And with that, I bid you adieu. Jill, goodbye, goodbye, goodbye. Take care.